commander of the Empire, had lived for 300 cycles. In that time, he had witnessed the birth and death of stars. He had seen entire civilizations rise from primitive mud dwellers to space-faring species. He had commanded fleets that numbered in the thousands and had personally overseen the conquest of 47 worlds. His scales, once bright blue, had faded to the gray of experience and wisdom. His 4 eyes had seen more than most beings in the galaxy could ever imagine. Yet in all those centuries of existence, had never known true fear. They were the dominant species in the Andromeda sector. Their empire stretched across 2,000 star systems. They had evolved on a harsh world where survival meant absolute physical superiority. Standing nearly 3 meters tall with armored scales that could deflect primitive projectile weapons, they feared nothing in the known universe. Their ships were massive engines of destruction. Their armies were unstoppable waves of scaled warriors. For 8,000 years, no species had successfully resisted their expansion. That was about to change. Stood on the command bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Conquest. Through the viewing screen, he watched as his fleet assembled around the small blue planet designated by the Galactic Survey as G7749. The primitive inhabitants called it Earth. Initial scans had shown a species barely capable of leaving their own atmosphere. Their weapons were laughable. Their population numbered only in the billions. By standards, this should have been a simple harvest operation. The humans, as they called themselves, had been contacted 3 solar cycles ago. The standard ultimatum had been delivered. Surrender unconditionally, offer tribute, and accept rule, or face complete annihilation. It was the same message delivered to countless worlds before. Most species surrendered immediately. Those who didn't were eliminated within days. The humans had responded with something unprecedented. They had said no. Not just no, but a defiant refusal accompanied by a message that translators had interpreted as highly offensive regarding his ancestry and reproductive capabilities. Sub-Commander approached with his tablet. His younger scales still held a hint of blue, marking him as barely 2 centuries old. He was eager, competent, and utterly convinced of superiority. "Commander, all ships report ready. 47 battle cruisers, 120 destroyers, and 300 support vessels await your order. The planetary bombardment will commence on your signal." Nodded slowly. Standard procedure called for orbital strikes to soften any resistance before ground forces deployed. The bombardment would destroy their major population centers. Then the harvest could begin. The humans would be sorted according to their usefulness. Those deemed valuable would be enslaved. The rest would be eliminated. "Has there been any further communication from the surface?" asked. "Affirmative, Commander. They continue to broadcast on all frequencies. Our linguists report they are playing something called music. Very loud, very aggressive. The lyrics appear to reference something called rock and roll, which our analysis suggests is neither a geological formation nor a type of movement." Lower eyes narrowed. Strange. Most species at this point were transmitting pleas for mercy or offers of surrender. Broadcasting aggressive music was not a standard response. "They have also deployed their orbital defense platforms," continued. "Analysis indicates they are approximately 800 years behind our current technology. Their weapons could not penetrate our shields even if they fired continuously for a decade." "Then this will be quick." "Yes, Commander. Estimated time for complete planetary subjugation is 72 standard hours." Turned to give the order. His mouth opened. The words formed on his tongue, and then the universe changed forever. The first warning came from the sensor officer, a young female whose scales had turned almost white with sudden shock. "Commander, spatial distortion detected. Something is emerging from slip space." "Identify," commanded, though he was not particularly concerned. Perhaps one of their vassal species had sent additional support, or perhaps the humans had allies they had not disclosed. No matter, the fleet could handle any. His thought process stopped. The ship that emerged from slip space was unlike anything in any database. It was massive, larger than any vessel ever constructed by any known species. Its hull was black as the void between galaxies, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Strange geometries covered its surface, shapes that hurt to look at, angles that seemed to exist in more dimensions than three. It made no sense to engineering principles. It should not have been able to exist. But it was the feeling that struck most profoundly. As the ship emerged fully into normal space, he felt something he had never experienced before. A cold sensation began at the base of his skull and spread through his entire body. His scales, which had protected him from extreme temperatures, from acid, from the vacuum of space, suddenly felt like paper. His hearts, all three of them, began to beat in irregular rhythms. For the first time in 300 cycles, Commander felt afraid. "What is that?" someone whispered. The sensor officer's claws were trembling so badly she could barely operate her console. "Commander, I'm reading. I don't understand these readings. The ship appears to be approximately 40 kilometers in length. Its mass is impossible. It should collapse into a singularity, but it's not. It's just existing there." Origin managed. "Unknown, Commander. No match in any database. No match in any historical records. No match in any theoretical projections." Another spatial distortion. Another ship emerged. This one was smaller but no less terrifying. Its design was completely different from the first, angular where the other was curved, silver where the other was black. But it carried the same wrongness, the same sense that reality itself was being violated by its presence. Then another and another. Within minutes, a fleet of nightmare vessels had assembled around Earth. They made no aggressive moves. They simply existed, their presence a promise of violence beyond comprehension. And then the humans made contact. The communication screen flickered to life and found himself looking at a human. The creature was small by standards, barely 2 meters tall. It had no scales, no claws, no visible natural weapons of any kind. Its skin was soft and brown. Its eyes, of which it had only two, were dark and calm. It wore some kind of formal covering in dark colors. "Commander," the human said. Its voice was quiet, almost pleasant. "My name is Ambassador. I represent the United Earth Government and, by extension, the human diaspora. I believe you have been attempting to conquer our—" Found his voice with difficulty. "Those ships, they are not of human design. We scanned your planet. You do not possess the technology to—" "You scanned our planet," Ambassador agreed. "You saw what we wanted you to see. You found a primitive species on the verge of discovering slip space travel. You found easy prey." The human smiled, and something in that expression made scales itch. "Commander, humanity discovered slip space travel 400 years ago. We have been preparing for this meeting for nearly as long." "That's impossible. Our survey ships found exactly what we allowed them to find. Earth is not our only world, Commander. It is yes, our cradle, sacred to us, but it is not where we live, not most of us, not anymore." The viewing screen shifted to show a star map. What saw made his blood run cold. Thousands of points of light spread across the galaxy, concentrated in regions far from space. Each point was labeled with a human designation. 2,473 colony worlds, Ambassador said. Population, approximately 800 trillion. Military assets, significant. We have been watching your empire expand for centuries, Commander. We have studied your tactics, your technology, your psychology. We know you better than you know yourselves. Why reveal this now? Demanded. Why allow us to come here at all? Because we wanted you to understand something. We wanted this conversation to happen, not through diplomats and intermediaries, but here now, with your invasion fleet facing our defensive line. Ambassador leaned forward slightly. We wanted you to feel what your victims have felt for 8,000 years. We wanted you to experience what it's like to be outmatched, facing an enemy you cannot possibly defeat. You speak of feelings, said carefully. The do not make decisions based on emotions. We are warriors, pragmatists. If what you say is true, then we will simply withdraw and— No, Ambassador interrupted, you won't. The human touched something outside the view of the screen. The Black Nightmare ship, the largest one, began to move. It positioned itself directly between the fleet and Earth, a wall of impossible darkness against the stars. That vessel is called the Remembrance, Ambassador said. It is a monument, a memorial. It contains within it the recorded histories of every species your empire has destroyed, every civilization you have erased, every culture you have consumed. 67,000 sentient species, Commander, all of them gone, all of them remembered. Felt something deep in his chest, not pain exactly, something worse. The human continued speaking. Do you know what makes humanity different from every species you've encountered? It's not our technology. We borrowed that from the remains of dead civilizations. It's not our numbers. Several species had larger populations before you found them. It's not even our willingness to fight. Many species fought you with desperate courage. Then what? Ambassador's smile faded entirely. The pleasant diplomatic expression disappeared, replaced by something ancient and cold. We remember. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Every species you destroyed, we found their remains. We reconstructed their histories from fragments. We built the remembrance to ensure they would never be forgotten. And we made a promise, Commander. A promise to every being who ever existed and was wiped out by your empire. What promise? That one day we would stop you. That one day we would stand in your path and say no more. That one day all those lost civilizations would be avenged. Ambassador gestured at the fleet of terrible ships. Every vessel you see represents a different dead species. We built them using their designs, their aesthetics, their technological principles as we reconstructed them. Each one is a ghost ship, Commander. Each one is a dead species come back to haunt you. Understood now. The wrongness he felt looking at those ships wasn't just fear of the unknown. It was the accumulated weight of 67,000 graves. It was the spiritual presence of every being his empire had murdered. You could have simply revealed your fleet and destroyed us, said slowly. Why this? Why the speech? Why the revelation? Because we're not like you, Ambassador replied. We don't want to destroy you. We want you to choose a different path. We want you to understand what you've done. We want you to feel the weight of your crimes. And then we want to give you a choice. What choice? Surrender not just your fleet, your entire empire, disarm completely, accept occupation, stand trial for your actions. Those found guilty of crimes against sentient beings will face justice. Those who were simply following orders, simply living their lives, will be allowed to continue. But the empire ends today, one way or another. And if we choose to fight? Ambassador was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. It was harder now, colder, ancient. Commander, I have been alive for 412 years. I was one of the first humans to receive life extension treatments. In that time, I have personally overseen the reconstruction of 67,000 dead civilizations. I have read their literature. I have listened to their music. I have studied their art. I have wept for their children. She leaned closer to the screen. I have made the deaths of 8 trillion sentient beings my personal burden. I carry them with me every moment of every day, and I have spent 4 centuries preparing for this moment. If you choose to fight, Commander, I will personally ensure that not a single survives. I will hunt your species to the last individual. I will erase every trace that you ever existed, and I will feel nothing but satisfaction when I'm done. The silence that followed was absolute. Looked at his crew. He saw fear in their eyes, not fear of death. Did not fear death, fear of something worse, fear of being forgotten, fear of their entire civilization being erased the way they had erased so many others. You ask me to surrender, said finally, But what guarantee do I have that you will honor your terms? We have seen what happens to species that surrender to superior powers. We know because we have done it ourselves. You have no guarantee, Ambassador admitted. You have only our word, our promise. I understand if that seems worthless to you. After all, your species has never honored a promise in your entire history. She paused. But consider this, Commander. We could have destroyed you without warning. We could have emerged from hiding and annihilated your empire before you even knew we existed. We chose not to. We chose to give you this chance. Doesn't that tell you something about who we are? Considered her words. He thought about the fleet of ghost ships. He thought about the 67,000 species his people had destroyed. He thought about the 8,000 years of conquest and how proud he had always been of his civilization's achievements. And for the first time, he wondered if achievement was the right word. I need to contact my government, he said. Of course, take all the time you need. We've waited 400 years. We can wait a few hours more. The communication screen went dark, but the ghost fleet remained, floating in the void around Earth like a judgment from the universe itself. Turned to Sub-Commander. The younger officer's scales had turned nearly white, a sign of extreme stress. "What are your orders, Commander?" asked quietly. "I don't know," admitted. It was the first time in 300 cycles he had said those words. "I genuinely don't know." He moved to the viewing port and stared out at the nightmare fleet, at the Remembrance, at the ghost ships, at the small blue planet that had seemed so insignificant just hours ago. For 300 cycles, Commander had believed he understood the universe. He had believed in the natural order. The strong conquered the weak. That was simply how things were. That was how they had always been. Now, standing before the judgment of 67,000 dead civilizations, he realized he had never understood anything at all. The humans had done something unprecedented. They had gathered the ghosts of the galaxy and given them form. They had made the dead speak with one voice, and that voice was demanding justice. What terrified was not the humans' power, it was their patience. They had watched his people commit genocide for centuries. They had carefully documented every crime. They had built monuments to every victim, and they had waited. What kind of species waited 400 years for vengeance? What kind of species dedicated themselves so completely to remembering the dead? What kind of species made themselves the guardians of civilizations they had never known? The answer came to him unbidden. A species that understood something they had never grasped. That memory was more powerful than conquest. That justice was worth more than victory. That the measure of a civilization was not in how many worlds it ruled, but in how it treated those it had power over. Realized he was crying, rarely cried. Their tear ducts were vestigial, left over from an earlier stage of evolution. But the tears came anyway, sliding down his scaled face and dripping onto the deck. He was crying for his victims, for 67,000 species he had never known, for the horror of finally understanding what his people had done, for the terror of standing before humanity's judgment and finding himself wanting. Around him the ghost fleet waited, silent, patient, remembering. The decision would have to be made soon, but already knew, deep in his three hearts, what that decision would be. Some things were worse than death. Becoming what they had become was one of them. He turned from the viewport and began composing his message to the Emperor. It would be the hardest message he had ever sent. It would likely mean the end of his career, possibly his life. But for the first time in 300 cycles, Commander felt like he was doing the right thing. And somehow, that mattered more than survival. The ghost fleet waited, and humanity waited with them. They had promised to remember. They had promised to seek justice. Now they would see if they could learn to be more than conquerors. The answer would determine the fate of a galaxy. The response from the Emperor came faster than it expected. It arrived in the form of Supreme Admiral or himself, materializing on the bridge of the Eternal Conquest via emergency teleportation with a guard of 20 elite warriors. The Supreme Admiral was the highest military authority in the Empire, second only to the Emperor himself. His scales were completely black from 1,000 battles. His reputation was legendary. He had personally executed more enemies of the Empire than most commanders had subordinates. Stood at attention as the Supreme Admiral surveyed the bridge, his 4 eyes taking in everything. The terrified crew, the ghost fleet visible through the viewports, the impossibility of the situation. "Your message disturbed the Emperor greatly," Supreme Admiral Orr said. His voice was like stone grinding against stone. "He found your recommendation for surrender to be problematic. Cowardly was the word he used." "I understand, Supreme Admiral. However, if you will observe the enemy fleet." "I have observed it." The Supreme Admiral moved to the viewport, his massive form silhouetted against the distant ghost ships. "I have also analyzed the scan data your sensors gathered. These vessels are indeed powerful, perhaps more powerful than anything we possess." "Then surely—" "Commander," the Supreme Admiral turned and something terrible gleamed in his eyes. "The Empire has never surrendered, not in 8,000 years of expansion, not once. The very concept is alien to our nature. We are predators. We do not yield. We do not bow. We fight until victory or death." "Supreme Admiral, with respect, those are the only 2 options we have ever needed. But these humans offer a third option. They offer judgment." The Supreme Admiral's voice dripped with contempt. "They wish to hold us accountable for doing what any predator species would do, for being stronger, for winning. They wish to punish us for our success." "They wish to punish us for genocide," said quietly. The word hung in the air. Several crew members flinched. It was not a word commonly spoken in society. Not because what they had done, but because they had never considered it something requiring a specific term. Species were eliminated. That was simply what happened. Calling it genocide implied moral judgment, and they had always been above such things. The Supreme Admiral studied with renewed interest. "You have changed, Commander. I read your service record before arriving. 300 cycles of exemplary service. 47 worlds conquered. You were considered one of the most effective commanders in the fleet, and now you speak of genocide as though it troubles you." "I have seen the Ghost Fleet," replied. "I have spoken with the human ambassador. I have learned things that cannot be unlearned." "What things?" Gestured at the remembrance, that massive black monument floating against the stars. "That vessel contains the memories of every species we destroyed, every song they ever sang, every story they ever told, every child they ever raised. The humans reconstructed it all from fragments. They spent centuries piecing together the lives of beings they never met, species that died before humanity reached the stars." "Sentimentality," the Supreme Admiral growled. "Weakness." "Is it? The humans had nothing to gain from this effort. These were not their people. These were not their cultures. They were simply beings who had lived and died, and the humans decided they deserved to be remembered." Met the Supreme Admiral's gaze directly, something few commanders had ever dared. "What does that tell you about their nature?" "It tells me they are foolish. Resources spent on monuments are resources not spent on weapons. And yet their weapons are superior to ours. Their technology exceeds anything we possess. Their empire, if we can call it that, is larger than ours. They achieved all of this while still finding time to remember 67,000 dead civilizations." Shook his head slowly. "I have been a warrior my entire life. I understand strength. I understand power. But the humans have shown me a kind of strength I never knew existed." The Supreme Admiral was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. It was quieter, more thoughtful. "The Emperor has given me full authority to resolve this situation as I see fit. He understands that the traditional approach may not be viable. He is not a fool. regardless of what he said about your recommendation. The Supreme Admiral moved closer to, lowering his voice so the crew couldn't hear. Tell me truthfully, Commander, if we fight, can we win? No. You sound certain. I am certain, not because I doubt our warriors or our ships, but because I have looked into that human ambassador's eyes. She has waited 400 years for this moment. She has made the memory of 8 trillion dead beings her personal mission. She will not stop. She will not negotiate. She will not show mercy. If we fight, she will do exactly what she promised. She will hunt us to extinction and feel nothing but satisfaction. You believe she is capable of this? I believe she has already done it, gestured at the ghost ships. Each of those vessels represents a dead species, but they also represent human engineers who studied alien technology, human historians who reconstructed alien cultures, human builders who spent decades constructing monuments to beings they never knew. These humans are not like us, Supreme Admiral. They do not forget. They do not move on. They carry their dead with them forever. And they're living. 800 trillion of them, spread across nearly 2,500 worlds. We have barely 40 billion across 2,000 systems. Let that sink in. We are outnumbered 20,000 to 1, and those are just the numbers they chose to reveal. The Supreme Admiral turned back to the viewport. His reflection in the glass looked old, tired. For the first time, saw not a legendary warrior but a being confronting the limits of everything he believed. I was hatched 60 cycles after the first achieved slip space travel, the Supreme Admiral said quietly. My generation was the first to see the stars as something we could touch. I still remember my first campaign. A species called they were peaceful, artistic. They built structures of crystal that sang when light passed through them. We destroyed them in 3 days. I was so proud. He fell silent. Somewhere in the distance, the ghost fleet continued its silent vigil. I never thought about them again, not until today. Not until I saw that ship, the Remembrance, and realized they might be in there. Their songs, their art, their children, all recorded by a species that never met them, never benefited from their existence, never had any reason to care. Why did they care? Asked. That's what terrifies me. The Supreme Admiral's voice was barely a whisper now. We have always assumed the universe operated according to certain rules. The strong survive, the weak perish. Might determines right, but the humans, they reject this entirely. They believe the weak deserve protection. They believe the dead deserve remembrance. They believe in justice, Commander, actual justice. Not the justice of the powerful over the powerless, but true justice, equal justice. Is such a thing even possible? I don't know, but they seem to think so, and they have the power to enforce their beliefs. The Supreme Admiral laughed, a bitter sound. 8,000 years of conquest, and we are brought low by a species that simply refused to accept that might makes right. The irony is almost elegant. A signal chimed on the communication console. Sub-Commander, who had been standing frozen throughout this exchange, looked up with obvious fear. Supreme Admiral, Commander, the human ambassador is requesting communication. The Supreme Admiral straightened his posture, his scales shifting to a more formal pattern. Accept the communication. The screen flickered to life. Ambassador appeared looking exactly as she had before. Calm, patient, ancient eyes in a young face. Supreme Admiral, she said, I am honored. We had hoped the leadership would take this matter seriously. You know who I am. We know everything about your empire, Supreme Admiral. We have been studying you for 4 centuries. We know your military structure, your political hierarchy, your economic systems, your cultural traditions. We know the names of your children. We know where your ancestors are buried. We know the songs your mother sang to you when you were a hatchling. The Supreme Admiral's scales rippled with discomfort. That is thorough. We are a thorough species. It is one of our defining characteristics. Ambassador folded her hands in front of her. Have you reached a decision? The Supreme Admiral glanced at, then back at the screen. I have questions first. If we surrender, what happens to our people? Not our leaders, not our military, our ordinary citizens, the farmers, the merchants, the children. They continue their lives largely unchanged. We are not interested in punishment for its own sake. We are interested in justice and prevention. Those who committed atrocities will face trial. Those who enabled atrocities through their positions of power will face consequences proportional to their involvement. But ordinary who simply lived within your system, they will be educated, not punished. They will learn the history their government hid from them. They will meet members of the species that survived your expansion in distant sectors, and they will be given the opportunity to choose a different path. And if they choose not to, if they cling to the old ways, then they will be watched carefully. But we believe most beings, when shown the full truth of their history, will choose to be better. We have faith in the capacity for growth and redemption. It is another of our defining characteristics. The Supreme Admiral was quiet for a long moment. You speak of faith, of redemption. These are concepts my people abandoned ago. We considered them weaknesses. They are not weaknesses, Ambassador replied. They are strengths that require courage to embrace. It takes no courage to conquer. Any species with sufficient weapons can dominate others, but it takes tremendous courage to extend mercy, to offer redemption to those who have wronged you, to believe in the possibility of change. Why do you have this faith? After everything we have done, why offer us anything but destruction? Ambassador's expression shifted. For a moment, she looked not like an ambassador, but like someone carrying an impossible weight. Because destruction is easy, she said quietly. We could wipe out your species in a matter of days. Our weapons are beyond anything you can imagine. Our numbers are overwhelming. Our resolve is absolute, but if we destroy you, we become no different than you were. We become conquerors, executioners. We betray everything we claim to stand for. She paused, gathering herself. The 67,000 species you destroyed cannot be brought back. Nothing we do will change that, but we can honor their memory by being better, by offering mercy when we could offer destruction, by seeking justice when we could seek vengeance, by proving that the universe does not have to be what you made it. Felt something break inside him, not his spirit, something older, deeper. The fundamental assumption that had governed his entire existence, the belief that strength meant domination, crumbled like ancient stone. He stepped forward. Supreme Admiral, I request permission to speak. The Supreme Admiral nodded slowly. I have served the Empire faithfully for 300 cycles. I have conquered 47 worlds. I have killed more beings than I can count. I did these things because I believed they were right, because I believed the way was the only way, because I believed that strength meant crushing those weaker than ourselves. He turned to face the screen, to face Ambassador directly. I was wrong. I understand that now. Looking at your ghost fleet, listening to your words, I understand that everything I believed was a lie, not a comforting lie, not even a useful lie, simply a lie that allowed us to do terrible things without feeling terrible about them. His voice cracked, but he continued. If we fight, we will die, not just our fleet, our entire species. The humans will do to us what we did to 67,000 others. They have the power, they have the will, and they would be justified. We deserve extinction for what we have done. Commander, the Supreme Admiral began. But they are offering us something else, continued as if he hadn't heard. They are offering us the chance to become something better, to face what we have done, to accept responsibility, to grow, to change, to be remembered not as monsters but as monsters who learn to be something else. He looked at Ambassador. I don't know if my people can change. I don't know if I can change. 300 cycles of being one thing cannot be undone in a moment, but I want to try. For the first time in my existence, I want to be better than I am. The silence that followed was complete. The Supreme Admiral stared at. The crew stared at both of them. Ambassador's expression was unreadable. Then slowly, the Supreme Admiral began to laugh. It was not a cruel laugh, not a mocking laugh. It was the laugh of someone who has suddenly seen the universe from an entirely new perspective. "Commander," he said, "in 60 centuries of military history, no one has ever said what you just said. You have broken every rule, violated every tradition, abandoned every principle our species holds sacred." Bowed his head. "I know, Supreme Admiral, I accept whatever punishment." "And you are completely, absolutely correct." His head snapped up. The Supreme Admiral turned to face Ambassador. His posture shifted into something had never seen before, a posture of submission, of surrender, of choosing to be less than one was capable of being. "Ambassador, I speak now with the full authority of the Emperor. We accept your terms: complete and unconditional surrender, disarmament, occupation, trials for those responsible for crimes against sentient beings. Whatever justice requires, we will provide." Ambassador's expression finally changed. Not triumph, not satisfaction, something softer, something that looked almost like hope. "Thank you, Supreme Admiral. Your decision will save countless lives, both and others who might have been your future victims." "I do not do this to save lives," the Supreme Admiral replied. "I do this because Commander is right. We have been monsters, not because we were forced to be, not because we had no choice, but because we chose to be, because it was easy, because we could." He straightened to his full height, his scales rippling with ancient pride. "Now we choose differently, not because you forced us. You could have destroyed us without asking. You chose to give us this option. You chose mercy when you had every right to choose destruction. We will try to deserve that mercy." "That is all we ask," Ambassador said quietly. "The trying, the effort, the willingness to grow." She touched something off-screen and the ghost fleet began to move. Not aggressively. The ships were repositioning, forming a corridor toward Earth. An honor guard realized, a welcome rather than a threat. "The formal surrender ceremonies will take place on Earth," Ambassador continued. "You will be treated with dignity and respect. Your people will be treated with compassion. This is not the end of it is the beginning of something new." The screen went dark. The Supreme Admiral stood motionless for a long moment, staring at the ghost fleet, at the corridor they had formed, at the small blue planet waiting at its end. "Well, Commander," he said finally, "it seems we have much to learn." "Yes, Supreme Admiral." The humans remembered 67,000 dead species. They built monuments, reconstructed histories, preserved cultures that had nothing to do with them, because they believed those lives mattered, because they believed memory had value. He turned to face. "What will they remember about us, do you think? When they add to their records, what story will they tell?" Considered the question. It was perhaps the most important question any had ever been asked. "They will remember that we were conquerors, that we destroyed 67,000 civilizations, that we were monsters." He paused. "But perhaps they will also remember this moment. Perhaps they will remember that when we were given the choice, we chose to try to be better. Perhaps that will matter too." "Perhaps it will." The Supreme Admiral moved toward the exit. "Come, Commander, we have a surrender to arrange, and then, I suspect, a great deal of learning to do." Followed. Behind them, the crew began the slow process of standing down from battle stations, of preparing not for war but for something far more difficult. Chain. As the eternal conquest began its journey toward Earth, flanked by the ghost fleet of 67,000 dead civilizations, found himself thinking about Ambassador's words, about faith, about redemption, about the courage required to extend mercy. The humans had been watching for 4 centuries. They had documented every crime. They had built monuments to every victim. They had prepared for war with patience and precision that comprehension. And when the moment came, they had chosen peace. Not because they couldn't destroy they could, easily. Their power was overwhelming. Their technology was superior. Their numbers were impossible. They chose peace because they believed the could change, because they had faith in the possibility of redemption, because they refused to become the monsters they had sworn to stop. Understood now why he had felt terror when the ghost fleet appeared. It wasn't fear of death. It wasn't fear of destruction. It was the terror of being truly seen, of having every excuse stripped away, of facing the reality of what he and his people had become, and then, impossibly, of being offered grace. The humans had shown him something he had never known existed, a strength that didn't require domination, a power that chose mercy over destruction, a species that remembered the dead because all lives had value, not just the lives of their own people, all lives, everywhere. As Earth grew larger made a silent promise to the 67,000 species he had helped destroy. He would learn their names. He would study their cultures. He would visit the remembrance and stand before the records of every civilization his people had erased. He would remember them, and he would spend whatever remained of his existence trying to deserve the mercy he had been granted, trying to become the kind of being who could stand beside humanity, not as a conqueror, not as an enemy, as something new, something better, something worthy of being remembered. The Ghost Fleet escorted the vessels toward Earth, and for the first time in 8,000 years, the future of the galaxy was uncertain. But it was an uncertainty full of possibility rather than fear, full of hope rather than despair. The humans had proven that even the darkest history could lead to a brighter future, that even monsters could learn to be something else, that memory and justice and mercy were not weaknesses but the highest forms of strength. And Commander, standing on the bridge of his flagship as it descended toward a new era, finally understood why he had felt terror when he first saw humanity's true face. It wasn't terror of what they could do. It was terror of what they had shown him about himself. And strange, impossible gratitude for the chance to become something else. The surrender ceremonies would begin soon. The trials would follow. The long process of education and integration would take generations. But it would begin, here, now, with a commander who had finally learned that there were things worse than death, and things more important than survival. Memory, justice, mercy, hope. Humanity had taught the galaxy these words. Now the galaxy would learn what they meant. And the 67,000 dead civilizations, remembered at last, would finally rest in peace. Their ghosts had delivered justice. Their memories had changed the future. And humanity, patient and terrible and merciful, would continue to watch, to remember, to hope, forever.